Hello and welcome back to Downtime Activities. Welcome back to our bonus action podcast / video series where we kind of just have long-winded conversations about RPG related stuff that we think's interesting and neat. It's the conversations we'd have anyway, so why not share them with you guys? Today we're talking about one-shot campaigns, or not really one-shot campaigns, one-shot stories, one-shot sessions. Basically running a game that takes the course of one or just a couple sessions, short stories. And we're going to talk about how to run them, how to prep for them, some fond memories we have and ideas we've had for ones in our past. To start with, what is a one-shot to you? What would you describe a one-shot as? Because my definition was very sloppy.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about doing a one-shot, what I'm expecting is that we're all going to make characters, but we're only going to play those characters for one session or maybe two. That's a lot less likely. Mm-hmm. Is that a double tap campaign? I don't know.
Double tap?
But, you know, like, and I'm just kind of expecting that, at least with our play group, the DM's going to take it a little less seriously. It's going to be a little more kind of freewheeling, unless there's kind of a specific story that they want to run us through. And that the characters that the players make are going to be a little more just like, I've been wanting to play this, I'll just do it. Like, you know, they're going to put a little less time into, like, statting characters very specific ways. They're just going to, not necessarily make the first character that comes to mind, but there's going to be a little less effort into it, just kind of across the board, which I'm sure a lot of people run one-shots in a very sort of methodical and sort of processed way, but at least for us, one-shots have always just been like, either whether we're trying to learn a new system, so we're just going to sit down and muddle through character creation to kind of learn how that works, and then play through one little adventure, which is part of what we've done for like the sort of various RPG reviews on the channel, and if they're not an RPG that we actually play regularly, or you know, to try out a new element that came out in a rule book, or just to just because only a couple of people could be there this week and everybody's been wanting to play D&D, so
roll up something new. Let's play something fun.
We'll run a one shot and we'll just have fun with it.
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest difference to discuss with one shots is probably prep, because I think you kind of brushed on it there that the prep is a little easier, it's a little less thought out at times. Not necessarily, but a lot of times is. But let's kind of discuss some of the differences in how you go about prepping for one shot versus prepping for like a long campaign. Of course, the story is smaller; it's more concise. Also, for me at least, they tend to be pretty thematically specific. Mm-hmm. I tend to have like a very specific idea of a story, which you kind of need. Long campaigns, the characters can go all across a continent and experience all these different ideas you have, and it's like, ooh, this would be a neat encounter. Now, if only there was a swamp nearby. I know they'll, for some reason, have to go to the swamp to do this encounter I just came up with. Whereas, like, for a one-shot, it is a specific idea. It is a story. It is packaged, complete, start to finish. You want a beginning that makes sense and a satisfying ending that can take place over a couple hours of play. How do you go about differently prepping for something?
Well,
like that?
I mean, I think you're very much going to go one of two ways with it.
Noisy fans, sorry.
You're going to go, I think, really one of two ways. You're going to approach it in the, like, I'll come up with an idea, or, like, you know, a little area that they're exploring, or a little dungeon to run through, or a little murder mystery, or whatever it's going to be. Or you're going to come up with something very specific that requires a large amount of detail, because since the scale of the whole thing is so much smaller, you can afford to put that amount of detail into it. Mm-hmm. For example, a one-shot we ran a very long time ago, which was kind of Spelljammer inspired. It's kind of the idea of it was essentially a spaceship run by mind flayers and piloted by a beholder that was abducting people in a, like, traditional, like, D&D.
It was a UFO alien abduction. But
and then the random, you know, like the Kobold Ranger, and that's the only character I remember.
Because it was yours.
Yeah, I think there was a spellcaster.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, all these characters have to kind of escape and scavenge for equipment and fight their way through this, like, completely sort of alien vessel, and that one requires sort of a lot more detailed planning. You have the whole spaceship kind of mapped out. There's a lot more thought given into the stat blocks and just like sort of the operations as a whole. And you can get away with doing that because it's such a small... we're doing it for one session, or we're doing it for 2 sessions. So you can put that amount of detail into it.
And sorry to interrupt you, but also just to complete this thought, like, the players are not going to leave that kind of like, the start of the story is you're trapped on this thing, the end of the story is you find a way to escape. So everything in between should take place in this area that you've put that amount of effort into. So you have a pretty good chance that effort's not going to be wasted.
Well, and that's something that we've been just a proponent of in the past, is put your effort in terms of prep work and planning where you know it's going to pay off, and then let everything else be a little muddier until it needs to be concrete. And one-shots are a very good example of that. You can really... If you have an idea that's that detail-oriented, that you really want to put that effort into, one-shots are a good place to show that off, because the players probably aren't going to just, wander off stage right and go, muddling around in the works behind the actual production that you're putting on. And the other, or the other direction, and completely opposite of the spectrum with one-shots is, it's a one-shot. It doesn't matter. The world doesn't matter. The story doesn't matter. The NPCs don't matter. So I'm going to make everything up off the top of my head. I have a loose idea of the story or, the events that are happening here, but I don't need to put that detail into it because we're not coming back. So who cares whether or not I remember these NPCs' names, or whether or not the players have these, rich backstories that are tied into the world.
I've got a name generator up on my laptop and a rough idea of a story, and I've got my prep. Let's go. And I think either is good. Either can be very fun. I would err on the side of the more fleshed out, detailed one. If you know you're going to run a one-shot, and that's your plan is to run a one-shot coming up, I would put the effort into it to make it more detailed and fun. If it's 2 people couldn't show up for D&D this week, but we still want to play, then the off-the-cuff one will be a lot more efficient. It's like, roll up some second-level characters, and you're off to save the princess. Let's go. You come up with something, and you just roll with it so that everyone can play and have a good time. So.
And one-shots should be viewed as, if you know you're going to be running one, are a good opportunity to do something a little weird, to do something a little different, to build stories that aren't combat encounters. To build a sort of tight-knit little murder mystery, and let the players, as this bizarre cast of, bards and rogues and barbarians and wizards that have shown up to this party, to muddle their way through solving it with the various abilities they have. One-shots, players expect a lot less from one-shots, which is why you can get away with doing things quite a bit differently. So they should be viewed sort of through that lens. But yeah, if you don't know you're going to run it, if it's just something that kind of comes up, or if everybody's just kind of interested in exploring it a little bit or just playing around, or if you have new players who have never played D&D before but are interested in experiencing it, one-shots are an excellent opportunity to kind of
cut their teeth on it.
Yeah, teach them a little bit about how character creation works. You can splash in a couple of combat, splash in a social encounter, and you can just really show them what, this whole swath of games that we really love are about, without committing them to a 1 to 17 or a 1 to 20th level long-term campaign.
An important distinction here for all the DMs out there planning one-shots. You kind of started talking about this, but I'm taking a little different direction here. When discussing a different or weird or specific type of story that's easier or more free to run because it's a one-shot, i.e. a murder mystery, be straightforward with your characters about what that is, with your players, because the last thing you want to do with the players, the characters should have no idea what they're getting into. But the players, for instance, a murder mystery, if you're like, everyone roll up 3rd level characters, I'm going to run you through something, and then Bill makes Paladin all about expertising his smites and drops everything else and is like, we're doing a one-shot, it's going to be like a Basham, Doom, let's go murder stuff. And then it's like, okay, be investigative, and now your character's useless. And that might feel bad. And while it can be fun to be the dumb character who needs to be smart in a situation and stuff.
And it's worth mentioning, too, if you're a player that finds themselves in that position lean into the fact that
Yes.
that character is like, I know only Smite.
How do I help solve crime? But I would be straightforward with your players from the start,
Absolutely.
so that they know what they're getting into. And while they don't need to, while they probably shouldn't build a character who's like specially designed to just blow that open and be easy to solve, like make characters who have some abilities and stuff that'll interact in an interesting way. Have a cleric who can speak with dead. Maybe don't if it's going to make your murder mystery, or if it is going to, it's like if Speak with Dead ruins your murder mystery, say, okay, everyone roll up some third level characters. No one takes Speak with Dead because this is going to be kind of a murder mystery thing, and I want it to be fun and interesting and not just you ask the dead guy who killed him. And so, like, have that, don't be so tight on like, ooh, it's going to be this interesting surprise. That surprise is going to get blown open as soon as they find the dead guy anyways. So make them aware at least what the theme is so that their characters can fit it and go along with it and not ruin it, so that your couple hours of really high intensity fun can be that.
Nobody wants to be surprised by a game of Clue.
Exactly.
You want to sit down planning on playing a game of Clue.
Exactly.
You don't want your DM to pull the cloth off of what you assume is a battle map and it's the Clue board. Although that does actually, using a Clue game board as essentially a battle map for D&D,
for murder mystery,
will probably work very well.
It'd be very fun.
I have seen a DM use a Chutes and Ladders map to guide players through a complicated encounter, and it is just a beautiful reveal at the end where he's like, "Would you like to see the map of the area you've been?" And he turns it around, and it's speaking of good one shots. So like. Yeah, use other board game elements in your typical RPGs. We should probably just have a whole conversation about that at some other point. But
next piece of this, and we've already started on this, as these tend to be all the themes of it kind of muddy and blur together, adding it to the list. I like it. Running a one-shot. We've discussed prepping, and we've started discussing running a one-shot. I think the big thing with running a one-shot, and we've already talked about this a little bit here, is it adds a lot of freedom that you don't normally have. For instance, high power or problematic magic items can be given out during a one-shot, because if a deck of many things blows open a story that's a one-shot, it's like, well, we didn't ruin our story we've been playing for a year by giving this. We just made this 3-hour game into a 2-hour game that was a little wackier. And that's fine. I think a good example of this, and I just want to bring up this because I'm excited to talk about one of my favorite one-shots that I've ever run, which was a one-shot I ran for, if you're a fan of the channel and you've watched some of our live play or other things, Matthew and Jocelyn, the other Matthew, and Jocelyn, the Gottschalks, before their wedding, as like a kind of bachelor party before the wedding get-together, all the groomsmen came together, and I ran a one-shot that was all the players as kobolds. And they were on the search for what's basically this like magical ring that was stolen from their dragon's hoard. But one of the kobolds is madly in love with the dragon and wants to get it back and use it to ask the goblin to marry. Of course, the dragon being Jocelyn and Maddie G being this kobold.
Right.
And the story was weird and wacky, and I gave each of the players a different magic item, just as things that they were able to scavenge from the dragon's hoard. And one of them was Sovereign Glue. One of the most problematic magic items, but also the most fun and wacky in the game. Because I was like, a bunch of kobolds using this, they're just as likely to stick their own hands together than they are to like use it effectively. But they could come up with some really fun and memorable stuff. And this is a one-shot that's for fun as a bachelor party thing. Let's make it fun. Let's make it weird. Let's give them this access to this.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things where it's like, it never ends up coming up. We never ended up really using the Sovereign Glue for anything. We used an immovable rod slightly more.
And rope of whatever it is that you can name it. I think he used to... Or maybe it was a normal rope? All I know is you totally strangled a knight with an immovable rod and a rope. I don't remember if the rope was magical or not.
We needed his cloak, so we could...
I guess technically, didn't you strangle the horse? Anyway, did it catch him or did it catch the horse?
It might have caught the horse.
Might have caught the horse and thrown him.
We needed his cloak so we could be 5 kobolds in a trench coat so we could move through town.
As a very weird, uncoordinated dragonborn. That's the ugliest dragonborn I've ever seen.
I'm just having flashbacks to that one shot. But yeah, the magic item, the power level of the magic items didn't matter. and the character's stats didn't matter. We were all just using kobold stats. We all got to choose one skill to like
up your
get to like
basically.
a +5 in or whatever. So one person's good at charisma if they choose that. One person's good at stealth or good at acrobatics, which, you know, obviously running a long-term campaign where everybody's just using kobold stats would have been very difficult, especially with something like the Pot of Sovereign Glue.
Oh yeah.
That campaign could never have been treated very seriously. And we just would have always had to expect that, like, we could get TPK'd by literally any capable soldier.
Yeah.
But that's what one-shots, to me, can be, is, everyone just uses a kobold stat block, so you don't have to worry about statting out a character, and, your random powerful magic item is Sovereign Glue. You get Immovable Rod.
And the monster stats or using stats that are pre-built is a great way for quick one-shots, too. If, for instance, you're like, we got a couple hours to kill before some wedding ceremony or something, and it will take an hour to stat characters, and then we don't have as much time to play. Everyone's a kobold, choose a skill to be better at. You get this, you get that, you get this. Let's play. It's just a quick, easy way to have that little bite-sized D&D game that's fun and wacky and different.
Well, and going back to your point about the magic items, like, there are so many good and cool magic items in D&D that a good, sane DM will never let show up in their campaign. Because, and we have seen it firsthand, you do not give a deck of many things to players. Because it's just a bad idea. It will completely destroy the campaign. Whether it jumps everybody to 17th level, just straight up kills a player character, makes them immeasurably wealthy, gives them a bunch of other magic items, or takes a bunch of magic items away. A deck of many things is an absolutely fascinating magic item. There are so many goofy possibilities to it, and you can't ever give it to your players. And Sovereign Glue is one that you might be able to give to players, but you still need to be really careful with.
Make sure there's an NPC somewhere out there that has universal solvent, so that whatever nonsense they cause eventually can get fixed.
Yes, you need to accept that something important will be glued to something else.
And then that's the next quest, is to go get universal solvents and get the quest item off of the wall that they glued it to, because they're idiots.
Or get the king out of his bed because the rogue thought it was funny.
Also get ready for your more murder hobo-y or just vindictive terrible people you play with to, like, splash it on somebody's face and then you have to describe in detail how they suffocate to death as their mouth and nose are glued shut.
It's like Sovereign Glue, a little bit of wiggle room there, but, like, there's just lots of magic items that, like, reading through the Dungeon Master's Guide, it's like, these are fascinating. I can't ever give these to my players. And one-shots sort of by default throw the rules out the window, or very much allow you to throw the rules out the window, which is why it becomes possible to let characters play overpowered characters, or play underpowered characters, or give them overpowered magic items. I think the Monster Stat Block is another good example of this. Let all the players just use a high-level monster stat block. Let all the players play as high-level demons that are accomplishing some goal for their lord, that just get unleashed upon the world.
And then you can finally use those high-powered, like, celestial stat blocks as enemies. All of a sudden an Empyrean shows up and you're a group of, like, bone devils and bearded devils and chain devils and stuff have to rally together to fight this big titan of good so that their boss can do whatever nefarious nonsense he wants.
Yeah, or he's or he's sending them out on some, like, pretty mundane quest to the mortal realm, but it's all of these like high level lieutenants of his that have to tramp around human villages and cities trying to accomplish like a fairly simple, goofy, mundane task, but they have only overwhelming strength and power to accomplish it with. It's going to be memorable. It's going to be funny, and it lets your players play around with a set of abilities and a set of stats that they don't get to use otherwise, and it lets you just have fun with the story you're telling and have fun with everybody's reactions. And players like feeling powerful in short bursts. It's why everybody wants to play like a high-level D&D, but then gets bored of it quickly.
Yes.
One-shots, you usually don't play long enough to get bored of the characters that you're playing.
And that's another good example, another one-shot we've run in the past, and a great... if you have the time for it, because it'll take a while to get the character prep for this, but if you're somebody who tends to run low to middle power D&D, which is 99% of D&D games... have your players all get to make their god characters. Make a 23rd... I think we did 23rd level. So, like, elite levels or, like, these all-powerful abilities, multi-class options.
You could either... Once you hit 20th level, you could either choose more character levels from, like, other classes, or you could choose epic level boons, which are a little-known section of the DMG that we should... probably do a video on at some point.
They don't. They rarely come up unless you're playing like this. But everyone made essentially 23rd level characters, and our DM ran us through basically killing all of the Lords of the Hells. Like, we fought each of them in pairs until eventually we fought a stat block that a different friend had just been writing up the entire time we were fighting all the Lords of the Hells, and it was literally like this all-powerful deity of death that was somebody's attempt at making something that was technically killable but basically unkillable, and then
it was an attempt to make a stat block that was unkillable.
Yes.
The problem with 23rd level characters is, especially 23rd level
wizards and damage dealers,
is nothing is unkillable to the rogue ranger mix who doesn't even get to know where he is.
He's so stealthy
on the board because he rolls a minimum of 27 on every stealth roll. And the wizard that has clones of, as simulacra of himself, so you can just make the god of death.
He just does Otto's irresistible dance for like enough rounds in a row that even though they're like this all-powerful rogue ranger combo who's shooting arrows and has the abilities with epic boons to just get past all these resistances and immunities, means that it's chip away damage, but it's damage. It's considerable amounts, even to this massive amount of hit points, and then you proceed to what's supposed to be the unwinnable fight. It's instead the god of death laying on his back dancing and crying while the rogue just nails him with arrows for 12 to 15 rounds. And it's ridiculous, and it's hilarious, and it's fun. If we played even a single more session with those characters, I'd be over it.
Yeah.
But the one session we played was this crazy fun thing. I love spellcasters and these like high-powered like creative problem solvers, and getting to have a 23rd level pure wizard was like a dream come true for a single session.
It essentially meant you got to play as many wizards as you wanted to play.
Just one of them was in a jar and the other was a snowman, because that's how it goes when you're playing a wizard. But you have this like these all-powerful moments like that, and that can be super powerful monster stat blocks, or it can just if you have the time, like, everyone stat out your dream 23rd level D&D character and let's go to that pile of challenge rating 20 to 30 monsters that exist, and you guys just Doom style, like, march your way into hell and beat the crap out of all the guys who live there.
When I statted out my Rogue Ranger maximum range DPS character, just as a joke, we ran him 1v1 against the Tarrasque stat block, and the Tarrasque never found him, and he just killed the Tarrasque single-handedly without ever taking damage. It's fun in short bursts.
Yes.
And one-shots let you do those things that are fun but get old quickly, and have the maximum amount of fun and then stop before it gets old.
Exactly. And that goes along with the high power stuff as well as the super, super goofy stuff. While a campaign where everyone's Cobalt stats could be pretty fun, if there's no scaling and leveling up and change over time, eventually 5 kobolds in a trench coat will get old. I know it doesn't seem like it ever could get old, but eventually that gimmick is not fun anymore if it's the 12th time you've done it. But if it's us as 5 kobolds trying to get through this encounter and get this thing that's hidden in this place, that as one session is hilarious and amazing and super fun. It's a very good time. So with one-shots, we've kind of talked about prepping them, talked about running them. As a player in a one-shot, how does your mindset change?
It's important to remember that you're playing for one session, or maybe two, but that's really a lot rarer.
The classic double tap.
The classic double tap campaign, yeah.
That's what it's called from now on because I love that joke.
So it's really important to keep in mind, and I think at least our playgroups had this issue, and I've kind of gotten the impression that other playgroups have as well, that where like the sort of sense of wonder and like anything is possible goofiness from like early days of playing tabletop RPGs, you know, after several years of playing tabletop RPGs, you just like, you know the systems well enough that you solve problems the right way.
Yeah.
It kind of comes from a couple of reasons. Partially, it's knowing the rules and being like, well, this is just the optimal sort of. This is just like the more optimal path to take at this time. And part of it comes from a desire to not see characters killed. If you're part of a big, long campaign, you don't want bad things to happen to your character. You don't want your character to die. You don't want your character to make choices that are going to have continuing, you know, snowballing repercussions for the rest of the campaign, even though that will happen. So you tend to make slightly tamer choices quite often. It does depend on the character that people make. And one-shots, just because everybody knows that they're not going to keep going and that like their actions essentially have no repercussions, players tend to be a little more freewheeling in how they solve problems, in the types of characters they make, in how they, you know, respond to NPCs or go through certain areas. And as a player, you need to lean into that. You need to see this as an opportunity to make a suboptimal character, to make a weird character, to solve problems in a way that aren't ideal in a statistical sense, but are more interesting.
Or character concepts that are interesting or fun but get old quick. Like a character, a good example of this in my mind is like kind of for some people they may enjoy this longer term, a kind of pacifist character can operate pretty well in a one shot and have like still be effective towards the end of the story, whereas if it's like a fairly high combat focused campaign and you're a pacifist character, it can get frustrating over time, and it can be, you can annoy your friends because you're not helping, and you can annoy yourself because you're not able to help in ways you want to. But it's like, it's a one-shot, you know, like my character is this like peaceful monk. He's going to do what he can to help get you guys here or do this for you, but he's not going to help at killing anybody. That can work there, whereas that concept could get old in a lot of campaigns.
Mute characters or blind characters can be same way. They can be very interesting characters, and they can tell very interesting stories, but just strictly from an RP sense or from a gameplay sense, it's very hard to play sort of a truly mute character. For example, the Metroville like sessions we've played, if we'd been like truly just like playing Metroville every week, and I would love to do a longer form campaign in Metroville because I just
Hopefully
really do.
The book should be coming in pretty soon.
I'm excited to have a physical copy of that book. I really like that system, and I want to keep playing with it.
Check out the review if you haven't for Metroville. Superhero game, very fun.
It's absolutely fantastic. But I wouldn't have made my character mute if we were doing a sort of traditional long form campaign in that system, just because it's an RP challenge. It's not necessarily a bad one, especially if the character can write. You can kind of get away with it, and it's fun to try and communicate entirely through hand signals and facial expressions. But it is a challenge, and it is something that I think week to week could get old fairly quickly.
You might run out of note cards.
True.
If you're like any other D&D group, you use a lot of note cards, and if you're burning a couple of them every session just to communicate.
That's why I kept writing on the same note card, just to try and save paper. We had a stack of note cards somewhere.
It's around here somewhere. There's a couple over there on the little DM board. But
I should probably buy more. I need a box of paper clips for some future stuff as well.
Oh, yes, we do need paper clips for some future stuff. I've got some of those. Anyway, mumble. Don't worry about that, though.
Let's start a D&D supplies shopping list in the middle of our
note cards
podcast. Yes, you're absolutely right. Character concepts that are kind of an RP challenge or are kind of a gameplay challenge. One shots are an excellent time to play around with those characters because, as we were kind of saying earlier, they don't really have time to get old.
Another example of this I think would be super fun that I would love the idea of doing. Use the like followers stat blocks or whatever they're called. And I stat this out for somebody's like kind of short-term game I ran to help teach them D&D. A like follower who was a dog and made it like the warrior one. And then what if you do that and it's like you're literally a dog? Like maybe you're a smart dog but you can't talk. You can't really communicate super intelligently.
It'd be interesting to choose to play a dog and not have it foisted upon you by your game master.
Dread's a totally different can of very scary worms. Probably brain-eating worms. But anyway, choosing to play like a dog companion for the party who's just like a good boy and a heroic dog would be very fun, but you'd find yourself not having as much fun in the social encounters and stuff over time in a long-winded campaign. So I think that's another very good example. Just like, and honestly, here's the thing. And we kind of talked about this before I think this all started. One-shots are a good time to play that kind of stuff. And I think it's also a good way to remind yourself how much fun it is to play that kind of stuff and how some of the less extreme versions of that should be applied back into your long-term campaigns. And this isn't necessarily on topic, but I think it's something worth discussing at all times. And we've kind of discussed in the past optimal versus story decision-making. Check out previous episodes of Bonus Action. But having a character who has an interesting limitation or has who doesn't take themselves too seriously or has some sort of like wacky part of their mindset or just solving problems in a non-optimal but very interesting and fun and character-driven way
and we're
needs to happen
we're
more
definitely
often.
going to do an episode of this about sort of the DM and player side of complex and ridiculous problem solving,
and give some very fun examples
because D&D is an excellent vessel for players creating these sort of big complex Rube Goldberg solutions to problems, and they shouldn't be punished for doing so. And it's important to as a player to maintain that same mentality, to approach problems in that way. And you're absolutely right. One-shots are a good way to remind you that
that's a lot of
this
fun.
is a game and it's fun, and doing the sort of suboptimal because we, as 5 kobolds in a trench coat, had to infiltrate a party to get this ring back from a nobleman. So I believe we I believe we knocked out like a bishop and stole his clothes to get into the party, and then just had to convince a bunch of people that it was a horrible curse for our sins that we'd been turned into.
I thought it was a very ugly mask because it was a masquerade party.
Well, that's what people assumed.
It was just a very ugly mask.
But then when somebody that we were talking to realized it wasn't a mask, we had to convince him that like it was because of our sins the gods had.
Cursed for your transgressions.
It turned the bishop into this really ugly dragonborn. And then it got revealed that we were 5 kobolds in a trench coat, to which point he had to try and convince the nobleman that for his sins he had actually been turned into 5 kobolds.
Not just one ugly dragonborn.
And then of course what we ended up doing was, I believe, hitting the guy, grabbing the ring, somebody yelled scatter, and we pretty much all dove out of windows and took off running into the night. Which isn't the like route of problem solving you take if everybody has statted characters and you're trying to get this guy's ring. There's a good chance somebody knocks out the archbishop anyway.
But that's due to purely theological debate.
Right.
Misunderstandings.
The cleric bonks him on the head in a fierce theological debate right before the masquerade. But it just, every time we do sessions like that and we play characters like that, it makes me want to play more characters like that and solve more problems that way.
It's a good reminder.
I always think of if you look at like the Sheogorath quest from Skyrim as a one-shot, it's I think Sheogorath's like little speech there absolutely sums up what your thought pressure should be in a lot of that, which is like, it's like, I know what you're thinking. Can I rely on my swords and my spells to get through this? Sure.
Yeah,
sure. Or you could use the Wabbajack. Eh? And you have no, and like, unless you've played a bunch of, or like you're pretty familiar with Elder Scrolls lore, you have no idea what the Wappajack is. And the first time playing through Skyrim, I had no idea what was going on. And then you have to just be clever with this utterly ridiculous tool that Sheogorath has given you in order to make it through that quest. And one-shots should sort of have some of that same feel to them.
Don't be afraid to be Sheogorath as a DM of a one-shot. Have that kind of crazy, weird, outside-the-box problem-solving mindset in how you set up problems for your players, and you set up what characters they can play.
And don't be afraid to give players completely random and overpowered magic items. The old DM screen, I don't know if the updated DM screen still has it, but the original DM screen had a D20 chart on one side that was something happens. And if you want to give a player, for the course of a one-shot, a magical staff where or a wand, every time they cast a spell out of it on someone, you just roll off of it and interpret the results. That is probably, at least for the course of the one-shot, that is not going to stop being funny. And it is going to make the players just want to use that as much as possible. And it gives you a lot of creativity to just things happening. Like,
you can also throw out the very weird, wacky magic items that sometimes you put in other legitimate campaigns too, but things like the Bagpipes of Invisibility, or the Staff of Raised Dead, what literally just makes corpses levitate. You can have these weird, wacky stuff. You don't have to take yourself seriously. Not that every campaign has to take itself seriously, but your story doesn't have to take itself seriously, even more if there's no long-term repercussions.
Or, do a one-shot about a group of bards who don't remember anything. Do a Hangover style story where it's this group of bards who wake up with hangovers and don't remember anything for the past 24 hours and have to piece stuff together and solve problems as they're exploring all the carnage they left behind. You can do that with players if your players give you a good opportunity to do that, but you don't need to if you come up with an idea like that, you're like, oh, this would be a lot of fun. Now I just need to wait for my whole party to get blackout drunk so I can do this quest. You don't need to wait for an opportunity to do it. You can just run it as a one-shot.
Yeah.
And everyone can make kind of goofier characters or sort of less statistically optimal characters and just kind of struggle through it.
With that, let's talk about... I know we don't have any of these prepared, but let's throw out ideas and concepts for one-shots. So, The Hangover. Bunch of bards get drunk. We have our aberrant abduction. You make a random assortment of characters that get abducted by aberrant creatures that are a la Spelljammer, have some sort of flying ship, and they have to try and find their way out. 5 kobolds in the trench coat, trying to get the ring from the noble. What's some other good concepts you have?
I think the classic Rescuing Princess from a Tower is an excellent one. We're going to talk about kind of tropes and cliches in tabletop RPGs anyway at some point. But doing this sort of rescuing the princess from a castle and letting the players know that that's the story you're telling, but hiding some kind of twist in there halfway or
subversion of some sort
is just really going to pay off, especially if you have the sort of heroic knight character or a whole group of them.
Quick brief side note here, we do that. I want to play in it, and I want to be the companion stat block and be the noble horse a la Tangled and be the heroic horse that the knight rides.
I think that's an excellent idea.
I'd be an amazing character to get to play.
Or you tell each of your players to stat out a heroic knight, and it's everybody competing to rescue this princess from a tower.
But so they can't kill each other because they're all from the same kingdom.
Yeah, they're kind of forced to work together.
But they're all wanting to be the ones to get the princess at the end. That's actually an ogre or whatever. The princess is a hag and the dragons actually
locked her away to
keep the world safe.
And then you kind of get a couple of different satisfying fights there, and and then it's revealed to be a hag, and suddenly all the players go from I was the first one in the room to
technically
I think you were the first one.
And then the one person who plays like a heroic knight, but that's a bard, just goes, that's my fetish, and goes for it anyways, and that's the end of the campaign.
and you're allowed to do that because it's a one shot.
Because it's a one shot.
So a lot of cliche stuff like that are excellent. excellent examples. Heists can be a great one.
Murder mysteries, like you said before.
Murder mysteries are fantastic. Both of those are kind of on the in the camp of like putting a bunch of planning in and really making sure stuff is kind of detailed and fairly tight. But that's going to like those will have good payoff and they'll be a lot of fun for your player characters. Villainous campaigns or villainous stories much easier to do as one shots.
You don't have to feel bad as long.
Yeah.
As people who have played villainous games before, or at least one very longer villainous game, like, unless you're kind of if maybe there's people out there who really enjoy it, over time, villainous games tend to devolve into like, yeah, I guess I'll keep doing the bad stuff because I'm bad, but I'm not really enjoying this. Like, I feel like a bad person, and I play this game to feel heroic more often than not, or at least ridiculous. And so, but those villainous games that are short can be very fun. Also, just like we've talked about, the villainous or monstrous stat blocks. There's lots of different options with that, be it 5 kobolds in the trench coat or the like. Maybe there's going to be some talk about this after in the post credits about like playing monstrous characters who are trying to be the heroes. Can be a good one shot or story. That's a different conversation. But then like you mentioned like mid to high level demonic stat blocks and going to do some mundane task for your lord of the level of hell you're from, but you have to do it's like, we have to go do this very menial task, but all we have is unrelenting power and strength to do it, which is useless in this situation, and having to creatively solve that problem.
This requires finesse and we have none. I had something and then I totally lost it. Monster stat blocks? Where was it?
Demonic stat blocks.
A
Woodland Critters game where everyone plays beast stat blocks and you go for like an adventure as all animals, and you can even make it a non-magical world.
Yeah, you just do a little Homeward Bound one shot where everybody just has an animal stat block.
Trying to make it home. Don't worry, we'll get there.
Or it's a group of beast stat blocks trying to escape a zoo.
Yeah.
Whether it's like a sort of magical fantasy zoo or a modern zoo.
You have only the D&D stats that a lion, a bear, a penguin, or whatever, and they all get together. You have your Madagascar story where it's all these animals coming together to try and escape.
And then so they're relying on everybody's sort of skill sets a little bit. It's like, well, the monkeys have thumbs and they can climb, and the bird can fly. So
the penguin, well, he's coming along.
Not sure we can get that shark out of there. At least not easily.
Don't play the shark in that story.
It's probably your only opportunity to. But
everyone plays a fish, and you do a Finding Nemo one shot.
That's another excellent idea.
And there's your nautical campaign and your animal campaign.
Or specifically making a group of characters that have literally none of the skills they need to solve a certain problem. Whether they're just way too low level to try and deal with something, or whether they just, literally have none of the abilities they need to deal with whatever the problem is, and letting people, just letting the players muddle through that and have to be ridiculous in order to...
Make them be an orc warband that has to go through a big, involved social encounter. Make them be, a group of bards who have to save the realm, but all like non-combat bards. All of them are like, it's a group of, or you could also do the like holy crusade, like the Amen. Like everyone plays a cleric, and you're all the like do some holy band, but like what the task you're having to solve being something that's very opposite of what the characters are for. Very non-combat characters having to solve a combat-like problem, or a war band having to go and negotiate peace for the realm at some big fancy party, and watch the hilarity ensue. And who cares if they fail, because it's a one shot, and it'll be fun to watch them try.
Themed dungeons are an easy one. If you have an idea for a little dungeon you want to run somebody through, or just an idea for a string of riddles or traps, but you don't want to fit it into another campaign, one-shots can be an excellent landing point.
Literally dig through your DM notes and find those like encounters you had an idea for that have never worked in a campaign, and be like, how can I turn this encounter into a session? And now you have a one-shot. Like, you can literally take any interesting encounter idea, combat or otherwise, that you have, base a short story around it, and that's a one-shot right there. you have endless options and creativity. While it should always be free and abundant and flowing for campaigns, you are even less restricted with one-shots because the end result doesn't have long-term ramifications.
Or even story concepts that you don't feel like are a good fit for a longer-term story. Like the one-shot you ran for us where, like, the world is already ended, like, the Illithids have won, mind flayers control everything, all we can do is wait for them to get, like, hide underground, wait for them to get bored in a couple hundred years, and
try and rebuild society.
And leave our plane alone. It's a fun world to tell a little story in, to make these kind of hardened survivor characters who are being sent on a quest for this, like, survivor's enclave. But it's kind of a hard story to do a full campaign around.
Or at least a fairly hopeless one.
Right, because players want to be able to solve the threats. They want to be able to, slay the enemies and save the day, by and large. And that's, like, playing in a world where that sort of specifically isn't an option is much harder in a long-term campaign. But it's a great little one-shot to do where, the Kenku tries to heroically sacrifice himself to save everybody else from a giant evil Illithid worm, only to, by the dice, miraculously survive.
Knock it unconscious with drown poison that he shouldn't have had, but did for whatever reason.
There's, or the hilarious little NPC with a tinfoil hat. Just like
that actually works.
And then the big reveal that the whole thing we were just stealing was like sheet music.
And it was all just a part of, like, building a library. Which, if this sounds familiar to any of you out here listening to this, don't tell my players I stole most of this from somewhere else. Don't worry about that.
Hey,
if you know where that's from, they deserve props. They're a lot more popular than we are and deserve to be. But anyway, those kinds of stories are a one-shot lends themselves to that kind of stuff, and the one-shot just gives you so many options. And while I think we're a group that prefers campaigns, we prefer long stories, we prefer getting to tell those long stories. One-shots are great breaks, great gap fillers in between, great creative expressions of an idea that can't or shouldn't be a long-term campaign. And like we spoke about earlier, it's a really good palate cleanser and a really good refresher for the mind of your kind of hardened D&D player out there who've seen it all, who's like, you know what? Not playing optimally is actually really fun, and it's a good way to kind of refresh and take that mindset into the next campaign you're going to play, and remember that, like, sure, there's an optimal way to solve this, but it could be a lot more fun to have a character and a decision that's non-optimal.
As well as giving both new players or new DMs time to get familiar with, sort of that position or that role without, sort of locking them into something long-term or making there be, sort of true repercussions to, them kind of getting something wrong or just, just the regular sort of fallout from just learning how to play a new game for the first time.
And while there are supplements and pre-built and stuff out there that are kind of designed for newer players, even if you are an experienced DM but trying to introduce new people, especially if you're an experienced DM, I think it's better to design your own thing and be able to really slant it to the characters they play and really show them, like, oh, this is how this works, this is how this works. I mean, my fiance has played in a campaign that I've run, but it's been one of the first games she's played, and before she ever played that, I just ran her character through some encounters so she learned how to use it. Because when you're first learning, like, you don't understand action versus bonus action versus move action. You don't understand all this stuff.
Spell slots are hard.
Spell slots are confusing. It took us a while to understand. I mean, 5th edition is one of the cleanest, easiest to understand editions out there, and it's still very complicated and hard to understand. So one-shots and these brief stories are good, no consequence ways to learn the game. And a very good option for that. So run more one-shots. Run one-shots and don't take them seriously. Use one of our ideas, have a wacky idea, and put it together and throw it out there. I think that's a good place for us to stop this. A call to action. If anyone out there hears this part of this podcast or this video, in the comments on YouTube, please, I want to hear your favorite one-shot you've run, and or the best one-shot idea you have. A wacky story that maybe we could run our players through, or someone in the comments could find and be like, ooh, I like that one, and take it and put it in their back pocket and put their twist on it. I'd love to hear some awesome ideas for cool one-shots. With that, though, thank you everyone for listening / watching. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give a like, a follow, or whatever you're watching, a subscription. All of that means a lot to us. Now go forth, slay dragons, sling spells, roll dice, and enjoy your downtime activities.
The whole kobold thing sort of just better reflects the way I like to play anyway.
Mm-hmm.
This being, I guess, the bonus action.
As is, yeah.
Because I tend to prefer low level play anyway. I like that problem solving has to be a little bit more creative.
Mm-hmm.
I like that it's a little easier to run a character. And I really do like playing sort of monstrous characters as player characters. I think gnolls are super neat.
And this is something we'll probably discuss in the video, but having a less serious story like a one-shot also just makes people feel comfortable making non-optimal decisions.
Yes.
And making goofy decisions sometimes and playing goofy characters because they don't feel like there's long-term repercussions in the campaign.
Well, and honestly, they should. That's how they should just play regular campaigns
just
anyway.
Play free and fun and
which is part of the reason that I'm like I feel a little constrained playing two pretty serious characters at the moment. But like the idea of doing even entire campaigns where it's like okay, choose a low-level monster stat block. That is your character. Like is kind of a really fun idea. Like I've always liked the idea of like a bunch of like sort of traditional D&D monsters being like
we're gonna be the heroes.
We're gonna be adventurers. We're gonna go out there and save the realm. And it's like
Stinky the ogre with like a knight's helmet that he took off a dead knight that's like crooked on top of his head.
Or he's like it just looks like a really big knight. So it's like everyone's kind of half in disguise or like your skeleton wizard is like just so far deep hood that like everyone's like, whoa, what a mysterious wizard.
Mysterious mage. It looks like he's bone thin.
Yeah, they shake his hands and they're like, oh,
the icy hand of necromancy is upon him.
It's just a really fun idea of like, and then like having to try and save the world when everyone thinks you're the villains, but like they're actually trying to be the good guys.
That could be very fun.
It just like, and then it's like fun stuff with like characters in disguise, or you get the fun moments of like, which is kind of that concept I have with like the goblin support caster writing like an ogre. I kind of want to put like the ogre in plate, or like at least in heavy armor at some point. Not only because it helps, it makes him more effective as the like sort of bruiser and mount part of that combo, but like I like the idea of like. Yeah, like, rescuing a princess from a tower. It's like, oh, brave Sir Knight.
Remove your helmet so I might lay upon you a kiss. This big old dumb ogre face. Look back. It's going to be an amazing moment.
Like, yeah.
It's going to be an amazing moment.
So it's, and I just felt like, like having to bullshit our way through that whole kobold stuff where it's like, where we were literally 5 kobolds in a trench coat. Like just had a lot of that like it's like that's how I like to play D&D, and that's like the type of stuff that like I want to do more of. Not that like there's not a place for serious characters and serious stories, because like obviously like the campaign that I'm working on is relatively serious and is more of it's an epic 6, but it's more of kind of a traditional D&D campaign. But like I just like I want to get back to just like, which is why I appreciate some of the stuff you've done in Yeehaw Spooky, like with like just dead panning Matty G before when he went up to order a drink at the bar and just going, "You asked for this," and then just like,
hello,
and then just like doing it because he's like, "Oh, this guy's gonna have a crazy voice," and it's like, I had no intention of doing a crazy voice.
Guess who has this crazy voice now? Sparky. That's
like, so I want to get back to that, like, in the way we kind of built the Dracos world a little bit, where it was kind of contributing. Or like picking out some story elements that they wanted to see, and just like the slightly more kind of freewheeling, like D&D adventure, because the D&D campaign that I watch on YouTube is very much that, of just these like kind of goofy characters, this like kind of goofy world.
A lot of it, I think, just comes down to characters feeling like they can solve problems in a creative way, and sometimes goofy and weird way, and have that not be punishing. And making sure you have a world that's not punishing towards that, but in fact, like, gives opportunity and reward for creative thinking.